Divide and Conquer or Stop Being Stupid, Part 5 by Anna von Reitz. We have heard the words divide and conquer since we were in kindergarten. It's what we did when the two big kids ganged up on the 500 first graders. We've heard it, and to some extent we've all done it. Yet somehow I have proof that we haven't understood it, haven't quite fully grasped the concept. The Revolution, Brits against colonists. The French Revolution, monarchs against their serfs. The Civil War, North against South. The First World War, Brits and French against the Germans. The Russian Revolution, monarchists against their workers. The Second World War, Brits and French against the Germans. Democrats and Republicans, robber barons and labor unionists, Palestinians and Israelis. Are you beginning to see a pattern here? There are two sides of every conflict. Why is that? Because it is purposefully designed to be that way. Polarization and labeling of two sides is mathematically necessary requirement if you want to start a conflict. So let's take a look at an example of where and who and how such conflicts have been started, and also look at who has benefited. Where did the whole concept of the modern political parties in America and the whole two-party system emerge? Answer: both the modern Democratic and Republican parties began in Wisconsin, where the concept had been imported by socialists who immigrated to this country in the wake of the 1848 Workers' Rebellion in Europe. These people were a mix of early communists, utopians, and trade unionists, eager to take their fight for fair wages and humane treatment of workers and poor people into the public arena of government. But not all of them were idealists. A great many of them were simply self-interested. In that they shared a modern characteristic in common with their adversaries. The early industrialist robber barons, some of the most ruthless and greedy men to ever walk the earth. Very rapidly and very early in the development of the two-party system, it became a question of who could more effectively grab the bacon and hide their tracks. First, the robber barons took over the Democratic Party, and then they took over the Republican Party, and then they mixed things up a bit to confuse the gullible public. The public has, for the most part, remained confused ever since. Most African Americans will be amazed to learn that it is the Democratic Party that engineered their re-enslavement after the Civil War, the Democratic Party that fought any and all recognition of state national status for black Americans, the Democratic Party that refused to let black Americans vote once they were deprived of state national protections, and in fact, far from being the champions of African Americans or of workers or of poor people in general, the Democratic Party, which has always promoted itself as the working class party and the party of the common man and so forth, is anything but. The Democratic Party has always pretended to be exactly what it is not. And the Republicans? Yeah, you guessed it. They have staked their turf as the party of the respectable people, or those who want to be respectable, the champions of the middle class and the elite, the defenders of the status quo, the plodding, practical, stolid elephants. But are they? Not. Neither party stands for anything like what they pretend to stand for. Neither party walks the walk they talk, and interestingly, they never have. Some of the most profoundly socialist and communist policies put in place in the early 20th century, and which still impact us today, were put in place by Republicans. And a great many of the most oppressive, prejudiced, nasty, inhumane practices and policies of the government against the little guy, and which served to steal from the poor and to deprive them of all dignity, were put into place by the Democrats. There's a reason that Theodore Roosevelt billed himself as a Republican and Franklin Delano Roosevelt billed himself as a Democrat. The truth of the matter is that neither one acted upon, believed in, honored, or cared two bits about any party platform. It was all the same to them, and if we're wise, it ought to be apparent that our practical experience is what it is, and it all adds up to the same thing. There is no actual factual difference between the Democrats and the Republicans. They're all part of the same old nasty ball of wax, like two football teams trading players and changing uniforms. Now, it is true that the uninitiated inductees in these organizations are drawn in and usually believe in the shop talk and the shop fronts. The vast majority of the people are brought in and kept at a level below the party capos. like cheerleaders taught to parrot their cheers and go rah-rah in rain or shine without ever knowing or thinking beyond the one-liners and the gossip and the taglines provided by the speechwriters and the other professional propagandists. If you stick around and keep your mouth shut and your eyes open and do your duty plodding around selling the party line and show a certain spark of interest and immorality, you will work your way up and inside the organizational structure. Do this 2 times quickly and you will know for certain that yes, the Democrats are the Republicans and the Republicans are the Democrats, and there's no actual difference at all. At the higher levels of both parties, the same people sit like big fat black spiders pulling this string and that. It's all an illusion, a purposeful illusion. It's like a troupe of actors putting on a play. They are all on the same payroll. They are all reading their scripts. That may be shocking enough, and for most people would be a natural stopping place to turn back and disengage and be disillusioned and walk away, an older and wiser pup. But some of us are gluttons for punishment, and once our curiosity is aroused, we push on through the gathering storm of freaks and nuisances and delusional psychopaths to make up the political elite of the United States, convinced that with so much manure, there must be a pony. Those who persevere long enough to find out that the same play is being produced all over the world in different languages by different players, but the same play nonetheless. Not only are the actual leaders of the Democratic and Republican parties one and the same, it's all the same demented nest of spiders pulling nearly all the strings in every government and creating every conflict and every evil that we have. The Queen jerks Obama's string, and he barks at Putin. Evelyn de Rothschild jerks a string that jerks a string, and Putin bares his teeth at Obama. Netanyahu feels a sudden strong jerk on his tether, and we have a crisis in the Persian Gulf, and one of the Rockefellers crawls back under his rock. And though there are some recognizable players, the vast majority remain private, just quiet, average, criminally insane people living in mansions all over the world, literally feeding on the misery and death and destruction they cause. Just take a good look at what the Brits did in the Middle East when they created Palestine out of thin air by drawing some lines on a map and applying a label to it and then crowding a bunch of Jewish refugees inside. What did they really do? Created one team, the Palestinians, in the green and red uniforms, and then another team, the Israelis, in the blue and white uniforms, and sat back and enjoyed the fruits of a nice fat intergenerational war. The interminable and terrible war in the Middle East isn't about religion. It wasn't written in the stars. It was purposefully, maliciously, and deliberately caused and created by the British government. Just look at what was done and ask yourself, what other possible outcome could there be but generational warfare? Understanding divide and conquer requires us to understand how we are in turn being sized up, tested, stressed, to be subjected to exactly the same kind of strategy. If you think about it, our enemies, who are also the enemies of all mankind, have tried many different ways to divide and conquer America. They have tried race wars and religious hatred and economic oppression. They have tried every means available in their treasure chest of conflict to break us into factions, Republican and Democrat, black and white, Muslim and Christian, and they just can't get it right. Nothing sticks. Nobody believes it anymore. Not really. America and throughout the world, wise up. See how we're being played. Stop getting pulled into the drama and stop voting and participating in their show. Deprive them of any power or claim that they are your proxy. Deprive them of any mandate. Let them be seen for what they are, charlatans and fraudsters. See this and over 700 others on Anna's website, AnnaVonReitz.com, and support her work. Look for the PayPal button on this website. It's spelled ANNAVONREITZ.com. Who benefits? Or Stop Being Stupid Part 6 by Anna von Reitz. For those who have been following along, it must eventually occur to them to ask, well then, who or what is the real enemy? If Britain and the Holy See, which were supposed to be our trustees and allies, are actually our enemies, then who are our friends? The Russians, the Chinese? Yes. If you think about it, the American dream is decidedly different and decidedly at odds with the divine right of kings and papal supremacy. That's why the monarchs and the Holy See acted in breach of trust and secretively signed the Treaty of Verona. We actually have much more in common with the communist philosophy and government. They enshrine the supremacy of the workers. We enshrine the supremacy of the people. Workers and people are not the same thing, only seen with a slightly different colored lens. One focuses on the productive capacity and virtue of people acting as workers, while the other is more expansive and embraces the concept of valuing people even if they can't perform work. It was and it is to the advantages of the European aristocracy and the Holy See to create tension and conflict between the Americans and the Russians and the Chinese. By doing so, they ensure their own security and position as power brokers behind the scenes and keep the three largest organizations from joining forces. So when you hear a lot of loose talk and accusations against the Russians, what do you think? The old European monarchies are lipping off again, hoping that we ignore their false claims, presumptions, and theft of your property. At the same time, they're trying to engender fights between us and the Russians and the Chinese. Tell the monarchists to go home and soak their heads. We haven't come so far for so long to be misguided again. Look sharp at who is talking and what they may gain from spreading gossip and fear and keeping the Russians and Chinese and Americans apart. Why, if we all became friends and respected our various systems of government, there would be little or no reason to go to war ever again. And where would the harpies and the fearmongers and the arms dealers and the purveyor of war supplies be? See this article and over 700 others at Anna's website at annavonreitz.com to support her work. Look for the PayPal button on this website. And it is spelled ANNAVONREITZ.com. I'm reading from essay number 445, Answer to Milt Farrow, or Stop Being Stupid, Part 7 by Anna von Reitz. Some Americans, at least the ones I consort with, know that the petrodollar was engineered by Kissinger because we are consistently the top exporter of refined oil products in the world and always have been. Get a clue. We are also the main supplier of guns and weapons and defense supplies and materials. We never retooled our industries for peacetime after World War II. We kept right on chugging out the same old crap and developing new versions of it and promoting wars for profit all over the world. Other Americans think that we are in constant dire need of oil and can never get enough oil, and don't make the distinction between crude oil, the raw material that we can't get enough of, and refined oil products, which we can't offload fast enough. Beyond paying for part of the nasty government operations none of us approve of, none of this has anything to do with Arabs buying treasury bonds. Arabs do that because they figure that treasury bonds are a good, safe place to store the value of their money, and as long as the world has an oil-based economy, they're right. When big oil goes down as a result of new technology being released, all those who have depended on the value of oil to backstop their currencies and foreign trade markets, most especially the U.S. and Russia and the Middle Eastern countries, will suffer greatly. The big monetary struggle between gold and fiat currencies isn't quite what it seems. It's actually a struggle between gold and oil-based currencies, and it is in fact two asset-based systems on a collision course, one that stands to be greatly impacted by the death of big oil and one that doesn't. The governments have been trying for some time to figure out a way to tax big oil and make it more profitable for more countries around the world, thereby reducing the motivation to either release free energy technology or base competing economies on a gold standard. They came up with the scheme to impose a carbon tax to even things out and extract more money for other countries out of the oil-based currencies. This is all hokum and excuses to buy political accords that will allow the continuation of big oil and economies based on big oil. And no matter how oppressive the supporting regimes are, or how wishful the thinking of the Pope and other Western supporters of this scheme, it can't ultimately work. At best, it can delay the death of big oil. Why do I say that? Because progress is based on science, and science is based on truth, and sooner or later the truth always comes out. It doesn't matter how many scientists you kill or buy off, or how many university chairs you fund. Physics is physics. Free energy will emerge. It will emerge here, and it will emerge in China, or it will emerge in Iceland, or it will emerge in Russia, but it will emerge. And when it does, big oil will dwindle rather quickly into an economic footnote. If the government simply put their creative abilities to work on meeting new needs and new challenges, we wouldn't have to go through this ridiculous turkey trot. The world survived the end of the whale oil industry, and it can survive the end of the big oil industry too. The oil barons need to find out a new need to meet, and given the proclivity of mankind to be needy, that should be no big deal. But so far, they have been astonishingly stupid and panicky. For example, they've tried to corner the market on fresh water and destroy natural aquifers, thinking that they can lay hold of a resource that people need even more than they need oil. That isn't going to work, for the same reason that suppression of free energy won't work. Also, when people get thirsty and dirty, they get just as angry as when they're hungry or cold, and the oil barons and gold barons and all the other barons and their henchmen have the French Revolution and the Russian Revolution and the Chinese Revolution to think upon. Seriously. At a certain point, the rest of us have had enough and decided to overturn the control mechanisms and the money machines. And when we do, the selfish power brokers and monopoly hogs and dishonest politicians are the first to go. So while the oil barons and the politicians are desperately casting about trying to find a replacement commodity for oil, and most Americans are continuing to make ignorant assumptions about nearly everything and everyone based on mainstream media propaganda, it's time to broaden the discussion among those who have a brain left. In America, isn't selling the world refined oil products and armaments for wars nobody will support anymore? What can we sell as a value-added product that will replace oil and guns? Okay, if America isn't selling the world's refined oil products and armaments for wars nobody will support anymore, what can we sell as a value-added product that will replace oil and guns? That is the actual, factual, get-down-to-it problem that we are facing. And because we are facing this dilemma, we are making the rest of the world face it too. How do we beat our guns into plowshares and make a profit? Read this and over 700 others on Anna's website, AnnaVonReitz.com. Support her work via PayPal, and you spell the website ANNAVONREITZ.com. Essay number 446, Chinese Gold or Stop Being Stupid, Part 8 by Anna von Reitz. Anyone who has bothered to listen to news outside the box for the past several years has heard rumors of vast hoards of Chinese gold in Indonesia, etc., etc. You've also heard mindless claims that all the gold of Africa got mined and transported over the Silk Road to China because supposedly the Chinese would only take gold in trade. That is all plain out and out nonsense. The Chinese traditionally traded in jade and in food because then as now they had a large impoverished population and relatively little arable land. The gold in Indonesia is Spanish gold that happens to be under the control of Chinese people. Ferdinand Marcos was Chinese, not Filipino. The gold was shipped to Indonesia by Spaniards and by trustees of Spanish hordes as long ago as the 1400s. Check out the Crown of St. Stephen's, a bank chartered in the 1400s, to begin to get a clue of just how active Spanish and Catholic interests have been and for how long. The majority of the gold and silver in all these stockpiles is Spanish gold that derived from South America, not Africa, and this can be proven by assay. The gold of The gold of Africa was gleaned away by the Dutch East India Trading Company and transported to mainland Europe via Italy, Britain, and the U.S. This too can be proven by the assay of the gold itself. A third clump of the gold came out of the far north from Alaska and Russia, again, provable by assay. Most of all this gold and silver was stolen by men pretending to be soldiers but actually acting as organized armed robbers, commercial mercenaries. They enslaved indigenous people and worked them to death in horrible mines at a price estimated at 9 lives per ounce of silver. The Chinese Communist government recently, 2011, brought suit to reclaim gold that was left on deposit with the New York Federal Reserve Bank by the nationalist Chinese government in 1928. This was a sizable hoard, and the New York Fed was supposed to pay interest on it, but they never did. This is what Neil Keenan initially brought forward and fought for, and it had nothing to do per se with any global collateral accounts. The nationalist Chinese lost the war, and the New York Fed refused to recognize the Chinese Communist government as a successor to the nationalist Chinese government, and instead self-interestedly claimed that the gold left on deposit was abandoned assets. This is what these banks always claim, and what they're trying to claim about American gold that was confiscated by FDR back in the 1930s too. Abandoned assets, heirs unknown. We actually know that the nationalist Chinese gold came from the Chinese people, and that by rights it should go back to the Chinese people. And we know that the American gold came from our grandparents and parents, so that's a no-brainer too. It needs to be returned to the American people, Ms. Udis. We also know that most of the gold and silver in the world was stolen from poor people in Africa, Mesoamerica, South America, Alaska, and Russia. Certainly, if we are enlightened, if we are fair, if we have any sense of decency, and if we propose to use gold and silver again as standard commodities underpinning a global currency system, then there must be a conscious recognition of the historical facts and a redistribution of wealth back to the countries it was stolen from. The Chinese have gold because they've been buying gold for the past dozen years in ever-increasing amounts. They have been enabled to do this by those who stole the gold of others in the first place. These brigands have passed on the stolen goods to the Chinese as third-party patsies and have made a tremendous profit by doing so. You'll notice that China is not on the list of naturally gold or silver-rich nations provided above. China is simply investing in gold and silver, betting that when the oil economy goes bust, which it inevitably will, the world will go back to the old gold standard for lack of anything better. Under normal circumstances, that would be a good bet. But these are not normal circumstances. Not only have new technologies providing free energy arrived, but new technologies allowing us to produce vast amounts of silver and gold from materials like sand and seawater have arrived along with it. With abundant free energy, we can crank out tons of gold or silver at will, and for virtually nothing invested. So the good news is that we're freed from the shackles of big oil and also from the shackles of gold and silver. Boom. The end of the world as we know it has come. The old Babylon fakirs, I don't know how to say that, fakirs just can't seem to find a leg to stand on. Fakers are anything safe to invest in. Take a good look at the word. Invest and ask yourself what you're doing when you undertake an act of investiture. Here's a clue. It's a religious act. When you invest your time and labor in a piece of yellow metal or a piece of paper or a gallon of oil, you've made your master. You've made it your master and your God, literally. To overcome this enslavement to the material world requires us to develop an entirely different mindset and entirely different assumptions about value and money, which some of us already have and which others are quickly developing. For now, think seriously about the actual situation. Big oil and electric companies going down the chutes, nobody buying their reasons for war anymore, and gold and silver is easier to make than cotton candy. Where does this leave us, and specifically, where does it leave you? What do you believe in? And what master will you serve? What is the meaning of true wealth, and what is its measure? These are eternal questions that we must answer for ourselves, each one of us, and all together, soon. And the answer has nothing to do with Chinese gold. See this article and over 700 others on Anna's website, AnnaVonReitz.com. support her work, give a generous donation via PayPal, and you spell it ANNAVONREITZ.com. This is Essay 447, American Civil War or Stop Being Stupid, Part 9 by Anna von Reitz. Okay, folks, the results are in, and the results are these. There is no such thing as the American Civil War. No war of succession either. There is no declaration of war commencing such an action. There is no peace treaty ending such an action. It does not exist as a war between states, between nations, or nation states. What we've been taught to call the Civil War or War of Succession was never a war at all. So what was it? It was an illegal mercenary action, and it still is. The so-called war that isn't a war is ongoing. It has been staged as a perpetual war for profit on our soil. Those criminals responsible for setting up the scam are long dead. Those who have perpetuated it and who continue to support it deserve to be made aware of the facts and given a chance to cease and desist. And if they don't, they deserve to be hunted down as international criminals, tried and executed for crimes against humanity so dire that they beggar description. And all of this, with its unspeakable consequences for us and for others, has been ongoing for 150 years right under our noses. So here is the public notice. Both the United States Incorporated and the United States of America Incorporated, their heirs and assigns since 1860, have been operated in breach of trust and contract, and both have violated their charters. Breach of trust and contract, and both have violated their charters and have engaged in unlawful and illegal actions against the innocent American states and people. Both the United States Incorporated and the United States of America Incorporated, their heirs and assigns since 1860, have operated under color of law on American soil and have presumed upon and against their unwitting hosts. Both the United States Incorporated and the United States of America Incorporated, their heirs and assigns since 1860, have practiced inland piracy, kidnapping, enslavement, extortion, racketeering, conspiracy against the actual Constitution, genocide, war for profit, unlawful conversion, bank and securities fraud, constructive fraud, and other crimes against the American people, and have sought by various means the illegal overthrow of our lawful governments and the pillaging of our estates. Both the United States Incorporated and the United States of America Incorporated, their heirs and assigns since 1860, have promulgated constructive fraud and used deceptively similar names to confuse the American people so as to seize upon our names and estates and secretively hypothecate debt against us and our asset without our knowledge and consent. These non-sovereign incorporations have served as international crime syndicates benefiting foreign powers, and by law they must be liquidated and their assets must be returned to their priority creditors, the American states and people. Everyone, please stop for a moment and consider the immensity and duration of the fraud that has been played upon us by men and women who have sworn oaths to protect us and our property interests. Think of what this information about the so-called Civil War actually means. Not a single action undertaken by the federal government since then has been valid. Nothing that has happened here since 1860, and quite likely before then too, has been honest. Absolutely all of it has been conceived in fraud, implemented by fraud, and enforced under color of law by people functioning as criminals in nice suits. This explains why the sum total result of the so-called Civil War was to enshrine slavery instead of abolishing it, and to move slavery out of the private sector and into the public sector. Instead of men owning men, corporations masquerading as governments have claimed to own men via proxy, using legal chicanery, non-disclosure, and deceit to accomplish these ends. They have seized upon our given names while we were still babes in our cradles and claimed all assets held under our names, our bodies and souls, our land, our homes, our businesses. They have declared that we are decedents with respect to our own identity, our own birthright inheritance, and falsely told the rest of the world that we agree to all this in equitable exchange for benefits that we paid for ourselves. If you're working for the federal government in any capacity at all, search diligently for other employees and consider well the source and authority for any orders you are given. If you can't do something in a private capacity, for example, can't assault, can't pillage, can't murder, you can't do it in a public capacity either. Doing such things in a uniform just makes it worse. Come now, join me in giving all the members of Congress sitting in Washington, D.C. a rousing chorus of "Take your limey asses back out to sea," followed by a send-off round of "What frigging Civil War?" And here we go to postal court among the leaves so green, ballad of Elliot Ness, the communists, fascists, and all the rest. Sing your hearts out, ladies, and all you veterans out there. Send the Secretary of Defense notice that you've retired from all military duty, severed all political association, and returned to the land jurisdiction of your native state. Suck it in, shorty. Realize that you have been misused the worst way of all. That you've been misused the worst of all. You've been used as gun fodder for the British Crown and left as a slave to pay their debts, all to the tune of Yankee Doodle Dandy. So return their commission with your compliments, and don't let the screen door hit your rump on the way out. After intermission, please join me for a sing-along of Put a Cork in It, Requiem for a Fake Nation, Criminals in Robes, Battle Hymn of the Actual Republic, Go Tell It on the Intercom, Do Your Ears Hang It All, Black Hats in the Sunset, and that perennial favorite, What's It All About, Donald? See this and over 700 articles on Anna's website, AnnaVonReitz.com. Send her a big donation via PayPal, and you spell the website ANNAVONREITZ.com.